Trucker Dump for April 19th, 2013, Episode 91, Bungling the 34-Hour Rule.
Welcome to Trucker Dump, where you'll get one driver's insights and sometimes humorous views of truck driving and the trucking industry, and pretty much anything else he feels like dumping on you. This podcast is brought to you by abouttruckdriving.com. Resources to help you understand the world of truck driving through the use of stories and a pathetic attempt at humor.
Hello all, Todd McCann here. Well, the last podcast I promised you that I'd try to get on a more regular schedule and that my goal was to post every 2 weeks. Ta-da! Right on schedule. Well, technically it's been 15 days, but let's face it, you weren't really expecting that at all, were you? I also said you might have to deal with more background noise due to my time constraints now. Looks like that's going to be the case today. I kept switching parking spaces in the truck stop, but I give up. I think some mean-spirited jokester has hidden a reefer magnet on my truck somewhere. So anyway, I've got a little bit of follow-up from last time. Hey there, well, I had to stop really quick to swap loads with a guy. He has my load home, so I really wanted to see him. Anyway, I got to move, so now I've got a little bit more quiet, so that's cool. So, onward, where was I? Oh yeah, I've got a little bit of follow-up from last time. First off, I don't really have a good way to track downloads of the podcast, but I know from your tweets that at least some of you are listening, so I appreciate that. And I apologize to @RaySunshine77 and @DriverChrisMC on Twitter for making their ears bleed. At least that's what they said. But as we all know, no picture, it didn't happen. Apparently, according to your tweets, some of you have even downloaded all of the episodes. I hope I didn't get you into any data cap issues there. I think that I forgot to mention that if you download every episode, you'll have used over 400 megabytes of data. Sorry for forgetting to mention that earlier. And please don't send me your data overage charges. Anyway, it really does my heart good to know that some of you are listening and that the last year or so of my life hasn't been a total loss. You know, I've had readers of the blog tell me that they wish they had time to go back and read all my articles, but let's face it, that's not exactly practical. But now you don't really have any excuses. Just get on Wi-Fi, download all the podcast episodes, and hit play. Now you can listen while you're driving, mowing the lawn, or doing the dishes. No excuses. Now for a couple of issues that have come up. Jim, that's @W9XXX on Twitter, pointed out that none of the links in the show notes were working in his podcast app. He even told me what was wrong. Thankfully, it took less time to fix than I expected. So if you've noticed this problem, you can try refreshing the podcast feed to fix it, but I don't think that'll work. I actually had to unsubscribe and resubscribe to the podcast in order for the changes to take effect. But if you never click those links, or you have a podcasting app that doesn't support clickable links, as many of them don't, then just ignore me like you usually do and keep listening as usual. Also, let me point out that Jim was reluctant to point out this goof. I totally understand why he was reluctant to criticize my baby, but please, oh please, don't be afraid to tell me if you find something wrong. If he hadn't pointed out that issue, God knows how many listeners would have been frustrated by my incompetence and just deleted the podcast. So please shoot me an email at truckerdump@gmail.com or holler at me on Twitter if you find issues. My Twitter handle is @ToddMcCann. That's 2 D's, 2 C's, and 2 N's. Next up, Robert, that's @KF7KWK on Twitter, tweeted me asking for a direct link to the podcast feed. Well, that led to a problem where Twitter kept shortening the link with one of those URL shortener thingies. Well, he finally figured it out before I could solve the issue. He thought there ought to be an easier way to subscribe to the podcast from the website. He's right about that, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to make it prominent on every page of both the desktop and the mobile versions. For now, the direct podcast feed link that you can copy-paste can be found in the menu at abouttruckdriving.com under the Subscribe to Blog and Podcast section. Or if you got a pen and paper handy, it's http://abouttruckdriving.com/truckerdump.xml. I'll update you as soon as I figure out a less frustrating method. And by the way, I've got links in the show notes to the Twitter accounts of Robert, Jim, Chris, and Gene. Follow them if you dare. Next on the agenda, since the launch, I've added a few more ways for you to be able to listen to the podcast. Like I said before, you can always listen to it from the website. Just go to the blog post you want to hear and click on the play button in the black bar at the top of each post. This works in both the desktop and the mobile versions. If you just want to listen, you can download the Stitcher or the TuneIn radio apps and search for Trucker Dump from within the app. Both of these apps are streaming only, meaning you can't download the episodes and listen when you're offline. And neither of these apps offer all the episodes either. They only have some of the more recent episodes. If you decide you want to subscribe to the podcast, you can simply search the iTunes Store or the Microsoft or BlackBerry podcast directories for the words Trucker Dump. Or again, if you know how to enter the feed directly into your favorite podcasting app, the direct link again is http://abouttruckdriving.com/truckerdump.xml. If you're interested, I've included a list of podcast apps on the website. You can go to abouttruckdriving.com and click on the subscribe to blog and podcast link in the navigation bar. That's where the list is. And if you've got a favorite podcast app you'd like to recommend, contact me and we'll see about adding it to the list like Alan and Jim did. Thanks, guys. And finally, I noticed I don't have enough ratings in iTunes yet to warrant a score. And yes, I realize that it's early in the life of the podcast. If you've already left a rating and it just hasn't showed up yet, thanks. If you haven't, I'd sure appreciate you stopping in and adding one. And there are free cookies to those who leave a rating and a review. Okay, well, maybe not. You know, I really don't want to harp on this, but I'm a longtime podcast listener and I know how this stuff works. People find a podcast, look at the ratings, and read a few reviews. If the show gets good ratings and has a couple of decent reviews, they give it a shot. If not, they move on. Even worse for me, I decided to wait to release all 90 episodes. So now potential listeners show up and see 90 episodes with no ratings or reviews, and they click away faster than a telegraph operator. Even if you aren't an iTunes user, please keep in mind any way you can help the podcast. For instance, Stitcher has a thumbs up, thumbs down type thing, and both Stitcher and TuneIn Radio have ways to add the podcast to your favorites. All of this helps when people are searching for podcasts to listen to. Okay, enough of that. On to today's podcast. You know, the new hours of service rules have been looming for some time now, and I recently had a chance to test how one of the rules is going to affect us drivers come July. Woven into the story is the explanation of some mysterious tweeting I was doing recently. So grab an FMCSA official, tie him to a chair, and make him listen to Bungling the 34-Hour Rule. I totally goofed yesterday. While waiting for my truck's air conditioning to be fixed, I spoke a couple of words to an old trucker who was sitting in the trucker's lounge. Although my beloved MacBook Pro was desperately crying for me to come back to her, I never escaped. What's the matter with me anyway? I know better than that. Well, I'm actually glad we chatted because it brought on this blog post. How so? By mentioning that he was on a 34-hour break and wondering how the new 34-hour rule would affect us come July. For those of you who haven't heard about the coming changes, I guess I'll just have to assume that some idiot lumper accidentally locked you in a trailer for 2 years. Sure am glad the receiver didn't accept that damaged pallet of Campbell's soup. And I'm even gladder that your company finally realized you were actually missing. So now to catch you up. Back in March of 2011, I did a blog post called Truckers Be Heard on the Proposed Hours of Service Changes, where I shared my comments to the FMCSA. There's links to that blog post and the FMCSA in the show notes. Then in January of 2012, I told you how I thought the new hours of service rules would affect drivers, carriers, and the industry as a whole in the post called Are All These Changes Good for the Trucking Industry? Links to that blog post and podcast and a link to the new hours of service rules are in the show notes also. Now I hate to brag, but who am I kidding? I love to brag. I totally nailed it on at least one of the topics. the 34-hour rule. Okay, I'm going to presume that y'all were too stinking lazy to click on the link to see what the new 34-hour rule involves. Basically, the current rule says that if a trucker can shut down for 34 continuous hours, either off-duty, in the sleeper berth, or a combination of the two, they can restart their 70-hour work week. So doing a 34-hour restart means that we can actually work 82 hours in a week. The new 34-hour rule that starts in July states that this 34 hours now has to consist of 2 periods of midnight to 5 a.m. Another new twist is that you can only do one 34-hour restart per week. So back to the story. When the old trucker wondered out loud how the new rule would affect us, I had an answer for him. You see, the past 3 weekends I did 2 34-hour restarts, and I could have done one the last weekend. Why I chose not to really isn't all that important for this story, so I'll spare you all the gory details. You know, I think I just earned me an extra reward in heaven. Hope it's a Klondike bar. 34-hour rule, fail number 1. The first weekend, I was at the Flying J in Beloit, Wisconsin. I got there at 4:30 p.m. on a Saturday and started my break immediately. That meant my 34-hour break would be over at 2:30 a.m. on Monday. Good thing, because I had to be up near St. Paul, Minnesota by 8 a.m. After my mandatory 15-minute pre-trip inspection, that left 5¼ hours to go 316 miles. Yeah, I knew it was going to be tight. Averaging 60 miles an hour in a 64 mile an hour truck isn't easy, especially when I'd figured I'd be hitting St. Paul rush hour. Well, I'm happy to say that I pulled it off, and I got my 34-hour restart to boot. But guess what? Come July, that restart wouldn't have counted because I didn't meet the requirements of 2 periods of midnight to 5 a.m. And there's nothing I could do about it. I got to the truck stop as fast as I could, and I left as late as I could. I couldn't wait around until 5 a.m. unless I wanted to deliver late. For some reason, trucking companies tend to frown on that kind of stuff. The case of the mysterious bus ride. Onward to the next weekend. This was the mysterious weekend where I was tweeting as I was walking toward a city bus. Yes, me. As driver Chris MC tweeted, "Wow, Todd McCann is out of the truck walking. Shocker. Wonder what could be so important to him." Yeah, I'm pretty pathetic, but there you have it. Honestly, I wasn't trying to be cryptic. I was just trying to be sneaky. You see, the evil overlord has been working for Talent on Parade for the past few months, which is a dance competition that is owned by her aunt and uncle. There's a link to that in the show notes. Since they travel to a new city every weekend, I was happy to learn she was in Des Moines, Iowa, which by dumb luck just so happened to be on my route. I also had plenty of time on the load and had planned on getting a 34-hour break-in somewhere along the way. I got online and saw that there was a city bus stop 1.2 miles from the Flying J in Altoona, Iowa, and it had a route going directly to the convention center. Well, as directly as a city bus goes anyway. That's when I launched my plan. And that's why all the secrecy. While the evil overlord isn't on Twitter, her uncle Eric and her cousin Kyle do follow me. There's a link to Kyle's Twitter page in the show notes. He's an excellent musician. You ought to check him out. Writes his own stuff, plays all his own instruments. Anyway, I figured they'd be too busy to watch my Twitter stream, but I played it safe just to be sure. Well, I'm happy to say, mission accomplished. I surprised the heck out of the winch and everyone else. Now, since the evil overlord is extremely busy and sometimes works up to 16 hours a day, my plan was simply to surprise her, hang out for a few hours, and catch the last bus back to the truck stop. But once her Aunt Kim found out I was going to be hanging out at the truck stop for 34 hours, she surprised us with a separate hotel room. So basically, for the rest of that day and part of Sunday, I hung out with the evil overlord as she tabulated the scores for what seemed like 1 million dance acts involving 10 million girls. Adorable little girls, awkward preteen girls, a few lone boys who had the foresight to get involved in an activity where they'd be surrounded by scantily clad girls, and older clothing challenge girls, a few of which I have no doubt will be manning the polls of America in the near future. I just looked away during most of these. The evil overlord had warned me that wardrobe malfunctions happen more often than they probably should. I don't want or need to see that kind of stuff. Seriously though, some of the clogging in the traditional dancing is kinda cool, but the hip-hop numbers were, well, let's just say I'm surprised that so many dads let their little girls take dance lessons. So anyway, back to the trucking side of things. 34-hour rule, fail number 2. I got to the truck stop at 4:15 a.m. early Saturday morning, amazingly found a parking spot on the front row, and hit the bunk so I could jump out of my foxhole and launch my surprise attack around noon. My load didn't have to deliver near St. Cloud, Minnesota until 6 a.m. Monday morning. With 309 miles to go, I figured I'd leave by midnight, and that'd give me plenty of time to get there. That is, until I got my pre-plan on Sunday afternoon. To keep from losing the 1,300-mile pre-plan, I now needed to leave around 4 p.m. on Sunday so I could get to the receiver and get a 10-hour break-in before I picked up the pre-plan. Problem was, the evil overlord couldn't break free to get me back to the truck until almost 6 p.m. Luckily, I'm a moron who can't tell time. After getting underway in a freaked-out panic, I soon realized that my appointment was for 8 a.m., not 6 a.m. Whew! Disaster avoided. Sometimes it's good to be the town moron. So now to the 34-hour stuff. By the time I left at 6 p.m. on Sunday, I had just under 38 hours of downtime. But once again, it didn't meet the idiotic 2 periods of midnight to 5 a.m. that the new rule requires. So come July, that break wouldn't reset my 70-hour work week either. Even worse, if I'd been able to leave at midnight on Sunday night like I had originally planned, I would have had almost 44 continuous hours off duty, and I still wouldn't have got to reset my 70. Utterly friggin' ridiculous. 34-hour rule, fail number 3. Now for this past weekend. I used every last hour I had to get to the pilot in Princeville, Alabama. At that point, I had a choice to make. Dang it, I just had my Klondike bar ripped from me. Oh well, may as well proceed now that it's gone. So anyway, I had to deliver the load 496 miles away in Columbus, Ohio by midnight on Monday. That meant I had just enough time to squeeze in a 34-hour break. But if I went that option, I wouldn't have been able to get my air conditioner fixed at our Columbus shop until Tuesday morning. But I did have one more option. I had 5 hours to run after my break and 5.5 hours available on Sunday. If I used these hours, I'd be at the shop first thing Monday morning. Now normally that's a no-brainer, but not only would I be missing a chance to do a 34, I also didn't have full hours the rest of the week. That's the week that I'd be trying to get home. Well, to make a long Klondike story short, I opted to skip the 34. But of course, this decision would have been a breeze if it had happened in July, 'cause yep, you guessed it, it wouldn't have counted either. So here's the thing. Unlike some drivers, I'm not totally convinced that the rule makers at the FMCSA are out to get us. I truly believe they're trying to make things safer for us and the public. That they think the new 34-hour rule is doing us a favor by getting us 2 nights of sleep. Well, as you can see from my last 3 weekends, this rule just isn't going to work. And without that 70-hour restart, we'll no longer have the potential to work 82 hours. That was weird. I just felt my right butt cheek raise up. That'd be the one that holds my wallet. But for toots and giggles, let's say all 3 34-hour restarts had counted. Well, even then, only 2 of those restarts would have qualified, since the new rule also states we can't do 2 restarts in the same week. Ugh. So listen up, hours of service rule makers. I already wrote you once, but apparently you didn't listen. So pull those rose-colored earplugs out and I'll tell you again, and I'll quote from my earlier article, "The rule is as useful as it stands. Change it and you may as well get rid of it altogether." End quote. Now normally I'd be pounding on my chest and doing the Tarzan yell to prove my awesomeness in being right. But in this case, I'm just shaking my head slowly as I try to figure out how the heck these people's heads got so full of bat crap.
Hey, yo, bud, where do you want this load of feedback?
What do we got for feedback this week? Well, I didn't get much from the last podcast, but can't say that really surprised me much since it was just the launch of the new website. I did get a few well-wishers, but I didn't really get even as much as I figured I would. Oh well, I guess when you work on something for a year and a half, I guess you just figure people are going to be as pumped about it as you are. Well, it didn't quite happen that way, but that's okay. But anyway, we do have a couple of comments. Rodger wrote in from Australia. Melbourne. God, I can't do accents to save my life. Sorry about that, Rodger. Seems weird to say that name. My dad's name was Rodger. But you spell it weird, dude. R-O-D-G-E-R? Huh. Okay, maybe my dad spelled it weird. Anyway, he writes in about the podcast called Automatic or Manual Truck Transmission. He says, "Hi, Todd. I'm in my 28th year of commercial truck driving and am currently driving a Freightliner Columbia fitted with an 18-speed Smart Shift." The Smart Shift is an automatic, by the way. Most of the time it's fine, but when it warms up on a stretch of highway driving, it will not downshift below 11th gear unless the engine is shut down and time allowed for the transmission to cool. That's around 10 to 15 minutes. Previously, I drove a Mac Vision with Eaton Fuller 18-speed manual with about 87,000 kilometers and no problems. Before this, a Mac Vision with 18-speed Eaton auto changer. Every 130,000 kilometers, the solenoid packed up, it locked between gears, and it cost over $1,200 to be repaired plus time off the road. I drove a near-new Scania. God, I hope I'm pronouncing that wrong. As a trucker, I should know that. Anyway, he says, I drove a new near Scania and spent 2 weeks having its auto transmission completely rebuilt because it was made from inadequate materials. Previously, I drove a Mack Fleetline fitted with a 13-speed Eaton Fuller and had no problems with it. I've also driven Scania and Volvo manual boxes that required to be clutched every time with no problems. I have a mate that drives a Mack Granite? Yeah, I guess. With a 10-speed auto, and he hates the way it screams its arse off at low speeds and dies in the arse going up a hill. So for me, a good old 18-speed Road Ranger any day. Cheers, Rodger. Well, Rodger, it looks like you've had mixed results with automatic transmissions, leaning heavily towards the they suck viewpoint. But thanks for sharing your experiences with these auto trannies. It's always good to hear both sides of the story. Sorry to hear you had such crappy luck with them. And let's see, why don't we just do one more of these since this podcast was a bit long already. This was an interesting one. This is one of those times where text just doesn't quite cut it. Sometimes you don't know whether people are kidding or whether they're being serious. But either way, Bill wrote in with a comment about my videos. Those were the videos of me doing a workout in the truck. So, Bill says, I don't think I could tell others about getting and being fit unless I was extremely buff, which you are not. Maybe time to ramp up the training? Oh, that's funny. I did laugh a lot when I read that. I still laugh every time I read it. Well, Bill, I do understand why you might say that, especially since your email address suggests you might be a runner. I also guess we have different standards. As you are critiquing my fitness level, you might possibly have missed the point of the videos. Listen, I've never claimed to be in super great shape. Any one of my followers on Twitter could tell you how I'm always whining about how much I loathe workouts and how I wish I'd see more positive results from my efforts. I've done this in-cab workout off and on, at times steadily for a couple of years, for quite a few years now, and I have very little show for it. Or do I? I can jog into a truck stop without gasping for air. I have decent stamina when I have to crank on a stiff trailer dolly for 5 minutes, and I can see my toes when I look down. That's always a good thing, right? The thing is, I know I'm never going to be Captain Fitness while I'm driving a truck. I don't have the motivation to go running in the hot sun, nor do I have the dedication to do anything that might cause a sweat without 100% certainty that I'll get a shower before I crawl into my nice clean sheets. I'm simply doing what I can to help slow down the everyday wear and tear that the average trucker will go through. At first, I did do it to try to get buff, but now I've just accepted the fact that it's more about maintenance than progress. Again, from your email address, I can tell that you're also a trucker, so you know what kind of shape most truckers are in. Am I buff? Not even close. Are you and I in better shape than 90% of truckers? Probably. Do you think that just might have something to do with the fact that I work out at all? I do. Let me ask you this. Is Richard Simmons in great shape? No, but he is in better shape than the people he helps with his Sweating with the Oldies videos. Undoubtedly, you're a runner. Do you have to run marathons to teach someone the proper running form or to show them where jogging trails are near your truck stops? I don't think so. Do we have to have six-pack abs to suggest ways for overweight truckers to eat healthier while on the road? Lord, I hope not, because that's probably never going to happen. Now to the point of the videos that you appear to have missed. I didn't do these videos to say, you could look like this if you do this workout. No, the reason I did these videos is because drivers never believed me when I told them that I did a full-body dumbbell workout inside the cab of my truck. I stated as much in the article and in the videos. But in putting out those videos, I've given these drivers one less excuse to sit on their cans while they get fatter and more out of shape, which is exactly what I'd be doing if I didn't do this workout myself. And I might mention that I haven't done any kind of workout for the last month and a half while I was trying to push out this website. But clearly your standards are higher than mine, and that's just fine. I just think that if everyone waited until they themselves had it all together, there'd be a lot less people out there willing to help others. And perhaps it's better to do anything than nothing at all. But hey, Bill, I do respect your opinion. Thanks for stopping by and leaving your thoughts. And it did crack me up, so I appreciate that too. Well, that'll about do it for this marathon episode. If you've got comments, I'd be willing to bet that there's going to be some music with some info in it right about now. So here's your homework. Start keeping track of how many of your current 34-hour breaks will be useless come July. I expect your reports on my desk by the next podcast. Okay, since I really don't have a desk, leave your comments by going to abouttruckdriving.com and typing TD091 into the search bar, or shoot off your questions, suggestions, and 34-hour reports to truckerdump@gmail.com. Or you can just leave a shiny red apple on Twitter where I'm at Todd McCann. That's 2 D's, 2 C's, and 2 N's. I've already ragged you about iTunes reviews, so I'll just ask you to pass the word along on your social networks. Thanks for listening. So until next time, drive safe and stay out of my way.